about his brother, how they hadn't spoken in a year. He thought he'd call him up and say, "It's Christmas and your daughter's here." He thought of fathers, sons, and brothers, saw his own son tug his sleeve, saying, "Can I be a pagan?" And Chance said, "We'll discuss that when they leave."
So the Christians and the pagans sat together at the table, finding faith and common ground the best that they were able, lighting trees in darkness, learning new ways from the old, and making sense of history and drawing warmth out of the cold.
One of the reasons I spent a little bit of extra time talking about pagans and Christians in the reading this morning was because what really touched me more than anything about that song, Rick, was the way in which it lifts up how we become more divided over our beliefs and opinions about things and what maybe we could do about that. That seemed to be more of a topic that I wanted to speak on in more depth with you this morning, those things that divide us. And so I asked, what about you? Have you ever experienced being rejected or excluded because of something you believe? Have you ever had a relationship that was damaged because you see something very differently from someone else, and somehow the relationship couldn't sustain that difference? Or have you ever found yourself in a quarrel with your family over money or possessions? Or here's a big one, over how you describe your family's story? Have you ever had to deny being right about something in order to just stay in relationship with someone? And has your heart ever been broken because someone walked away from relationship with you over something that in no way seemed like it was big enough to cause that kind of a rift? There are so many ways that we as people get locked into our opinions and our stories about things that cause us to divide up from one another. And we live in a time right now in America where people are so divided over their opinions and their beliefs and their perspective. We get our news often from different sources, so that depending on where you are getting your information or your opinions, it may cause you to live in what feels like an alternative reality from some of the people around you, maybe even your neighbors or family members or even your spouse. They say that perception is reality in many ways. Perception is reality, and what people perceive, they believe. An old Hindu story talks about a person walking down a dirt path in the woods and coming across a snake on the path, and this person becomes frozen in fear, unable to proceed where he was going, literally stopped in his tracks. As the story's told, the person eventually realizes that it's not a snake. It's just a root of a tree coming up through the soil, but it looked like a snake. Now, realizing this, the person goes on to where he was going, but for those few moments, it was truly a snake to him. So real, so much so that he was frozen in his tracks. So much of Eastern philosophy and religion would tell us that an enormous percentage of our lives is spent living in an illusion, thinking that it's true, and having those illusions shape our actions. Do you ever wonder how much time you spend finding your way around snakes that don't even exist? Things like meditation and other religious practices are meant to help people wake up from some of these illusions, some of these ways we get stuck into a narrow way of seeing the world that may not be reflective of the real world. So when we're talking about finding understanding between people who have different ways of looking at things, different religious beliefs or other differences, there are some helpful tools. And one of the things that I've found to be really helpful involves questioning the stories that we're telling ourselves. I remember this, this comes up all the time, right? We start climbing this ladder of inference, we see something happens, we make an assumption about it, we start having a reaction to it, we begin to build up some belief about it, and then we take action based on that belief. I'm thinking of one time, this was quite a while ago, but we're here at work in a meeting, someone who will remain nameless, but I think it was Barbara. Here I was telling a group in the staff about a vision I had, some idea, this kind of dream of something I thought would be fantastic for us to do. And again, I don't know who it was, but somebody, I think it was Barbara, was texting or doing something on her phone while I was sharing this incredible revelation. And I found myself becoming more and more irritated and upset. It probably wasn't Barbara, but it was somebody who looked like Barbara. And I was thinking to myself that I became really upset, so that even after that meeting, I find myself wondering, maybe this isn't working out. Maybe we shouldn't be working together. This is, if she can't get behind my vision and support it, and especially in front of other staff members, she's probably texting right now behind me. Then maybe this is an irreconcilable difference. I was really upset, as you could tell, and I thought, how dare she do that? And finally, when I had the poise a couple days later to talk to her about it, maybe ask her to leave or whatever I was thinking, she explained to me, I don't even think it was Barbara, but she explained to me that, oh my gosh, you're kidding me. I was so excited about what you were talking about. I started texting people from our criminal justice team about what you were saying and some ideas that I thought we could do to start making this happen. I realized, oh my God, the story I'm telling myself could have completely, really done some damage to our connection, when in fact, the real story, what was really going on was she was so behind what I was doing that she was jumping right into action to make it possible. So it just reminds me of some of these stories, and some of these stories can be life or death. More than once, I found myself counseling people who were having to make a decision about taking a loved one off of life support. And in a few of these instances, there was a difference of opinion between the siblings over whether to do it or not, related to one of their parents. Now, because being a Unitarian Universalist minister, oftentimes in these situations, when there's a difference, the person that I'm directly connected with is more open to ending a life if the person's unconscious and won't be able, brain dead or those kinds of things, because we're not necessarily expecting a miracle to, make their brain work again or that kind of thing. But the other person in the relationship may be very different. And I'm thinking about one instance where a son reached out to me who was in this kind of a situation. And it was clear that his relationship with his sister was going to be forever damaged by this decision, which they completely disagreed about. However, it was within his power, because he had the power of attorney, to make the decision, the medical power of attorney. This mother was completely unconscious, was beyond feeling any pain or discomfort, was really being kept alive by machines. And the son was clear about his mother's wishes, that she said, I don't want to be kept alive by artificial means and just be, continue to have my heart beat just because machines can keep it that way. Once I can't live a normal life. Once my life is over and I'm consider it that way, let me go. And he took this very seriously, as any of us would. So he was stuck between his mother's wishes and his relationship with his sister. And this was really tearing him up. And it was also bringing up all the power struggles and animosities between them over all the years. You know how that happens in these moments. All of a sudden, he always got his way, and mom liked him better. All those stories start coming up, and then influencing the push and pull in these moments. I can see by some heads nodding that some of us have been there. I counseled the son not to take his mother off life support too abruptly. Hear me out on this. He said, this is what my mom wanted. This is what she wanted. I need to do this. And I suggested that he allow some time for his sister to begin to accept that this was the right thing to do. It was very hard for him to wait. It felt like, these were his mother's final wishes for the end of her life. It was in his hands. And the last thing that his mother wanted, I told him that I thought the last thing that his mother would want was for her death, in the essence of her final act in the drama of life, to be something that created an irreconcilable difference between him and his sister, that broke their relationship. I think most mothers, most parents have a hope that once they're gone, that their children will somehow stay connected. Their family will continue to exist in some real way. And in that sense, the decision was about both. His mother's wish to not be left on life support after her life was over, and honoring her wish and her deep hope that her family would remain intact once she was gone. And with that reframing of his mother's wishes, he was able to, for a time, just quell his angst and anxiety and his drive to immediately take her off the support. Now, it was a couple of weeks, as I recall, before his sister finally came to him and said that she realized that there was no point in keeping her on life support. My perspective is that their mother, who God knows had sacrificed many, many things, many, many times for her children and her family, would be okay sacrificing a week or two in the hospital, totally unconscious, in order to see that her children's relationship was strengthened and not destroyed by this decision related to her. It reminds me that we have to be very careful about what story we're telling ourselves and what stories we're living in. Sometimes it can be a tree root, and then we mistake it for a snake in the path. Now, the son in the story that I was just telling you about was so committed to honoring his mother's wishes that he had just one view of what those wishes were, and he couldn't see beyond that. He was locked into a story that was only partially true about what it meant to be a loyal and loving son. It's hard when we're in that story. It's so true to us. We can't see beyond it sometimes. But with a little help, this son was able to see another way that honored both his mother's wishes and her hopes and her legacy. I see a lot of families and friendships dividing up because they have a story that they're so attached to and becomes more important than the relationship itself. It happens with parents and siblings who sometimes are rejected by loved ones because they're gay or lesbian or transgender. And a sibling, a brother, or a parent has some belief about that causes them to not be able to see and love the child who is in front of them. And often it happens over religious differences. But religion is essentially about love. And when a belief keeps us from loving someone, we have to question it. That's this idea of love beyond belief. If a belief is keeping us from loving someone, we have to question that belief. We need to learn to question our beliefs in general and ask ourselves if the story that we're telling ourselves is true. That's how most of us wound up in this congregation in the first place, because we didn't want to base our lives on a story that we didn't believe was true and make our decisions and shape our lives around stories that we didn't believe. But we have to keep asking ourselves about all kinds of stories, not just doctrinal stories, about, is this true? And if it isn't, what would that mean? What would be different if this story were not the only way to look at something? Our tradition of love and freedom requires us to question our beliefs. Even once we stop believing in a certain religious doctrine, it's not just about questioning other people's beliefs, which we're great at doing, but questioning our own opinions and assumptions and beliefs. What story am I telling myself, and is it really true? What if I told a different story? What would change? Love demands that we especially check ourselves with any beliefs we have that keep us divided from others. I'll end with this story about a man that I worked with years ago who came to me with the story that his father had never told him, "I love you." I always ask permission before I tell other people's stories. He'd carried this story for decades, and it hurt a lot, you could tell. And now his father was dead, and so this story could never change. He was living with a hole in his heart and in his life about this. When we talked, I asked him if that story was really true, and if there was any other way that he might see that story. He went on to tell me many stories about his father. He talked about how his father provided for him and his family. He was great at that, and how his dad showed up for him on more than one occasion. But why? He wondered, with tears in his eyes. Didn't his dad say, I love you, son? He left my office that day with this question in his heart. I wasn't sure that anything that I had told him or that we discussed was of any real help. And then I bumped into him a couple of months later, and he said, Marlin, thank you so much for making me ask that question. After that conversation, I began to journal about stories about my dad. And after I had filled pages and pages with things that my father had done for me and some of the serious sacrifices that he had made for me, I realized that in his own old school way, maybe not in so many words, but in 1,001 ways, he said, son, I love you. I really, really love you. Sometimes we can even change the past, not by changing what has happened, but by changing the story we tell ourselves about what's happened. Sometimes we can change the present by opening ourselves to seeing things differently. And when we do change the way that we see the past or the present, we begin to create a new future. It's been said that eternity is not so much a length of time as it is a quality of time. When we live in the present in ways that redeem the past and that bring positive possibilities to the future, when the past and the present and the future come together, we are indeed living in eternal time. They say love is eternal. In this season of your life, what stories are you telling yourself? Are they true? I mean, really true? I mean, what would be different if you discovered that they were not true? If a belief or a story that you're telling yourself is preventing you from loving someone, and that someone could even be yourself, remember to question your beliefs to see if there's another way of seeing. Climb down off the ladder. Start over from the beginning and have a really happy holiday.
So happy you're visiting with us online today. We love connecting with people all across the country and around the world, sharing our powerful message of love beyond belief.
There's something new happening here. You can now join All Souls as a virtual member. Our virtual membership is designed for friends who live outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and who want to engage with All Souls in a meaningful way.
You can be part of an expanding family, a global family really, wherever you are. If you live in Oklahoma,
Ohio,
or Orange County, California,
Canada,
or Cameroon. By becoming a virtual member, you'll be able to deepen your connections with members and friends here in Tulsa and with members wherever you are.
Each week, you'll receive special All Souls content tailored for you, our virtual members. Virtual members have access to pastoral care, to personal prayers, and also receive invitations to exclusive web events.
You can learn more, and if you're ready, you can become a virtual member today by visiting allsoulschurch.org/virtual membership.
We're grateful our ministries are having a positive impact on your life, and we want to share the good news of love beyond belief with more and more people. So no matter what, we need your support to keep this ministry growing and thriving, so please consider making a gift today. You can do so by texting
Love BB for Love Beyond Belief to 73256 or simply visit our website. You are a blessing in our lives. May you be blessed.
and be a blessing.